It's a big week in civil rights history. Today marks 56 years since the Monson Motor Lodge incident in St. Augustine.
That incident helped lead to the passing of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. And here's the iconic photo showing civil rights demonstrators who had jumped into a segregated pool at a hotel because the manager there refused to let Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and his guests enter the restaurant. Then the manager did the unthinkable.
St. Augustine is merely a symbol or an expression of the tragedies that engulf our whole nation.
This photo was captured June 18th, 1964, showing demonstrators in the pool and the owner of the Monson Motor Lodge, Jimmy Brock, pouring acid into it.
At that time, St. Augustine was one of the major group of cities that they anticipated civil unrest. And it was listed right along with Birmingham, Alabama, and Augusta, Georgia, and Mississippi, cities in Mississippi. Things just kind of festered and festered.
Many of the demonstrators were arrested for trespassing and disorderly conduct. You can see in this photo a man in his swim trunks being taken away. The images embarrassing the nation and causing President Lyndon B. Johnson to call key congressmen and senators to demand passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964.
That particular video went around the world, and I understand it was on the front page of the Moscow Times, and it helped to open the eyes of some of the national legislators about signing off on that civil rights bill of 1964.
Amazing history in our backyard. And in case you were wondering where the Monson Motor Lodge used to be or still is, it's now the Hilton Bayfront Hotel in St. Augustine.
Hello, welcome. Been a long time. Welcome to Panther and Cage, where we believe there's no such thing as a dumb question. I'm your host, Panther. Tonight, Panther and Cage is a broadcast where we speak on a variety of topics from a unique Afrocentric perspective. And in attempting to engage in progressive and relevant discussions, we crush the negative narratives that perpetuate social and cultural bigotry. You, the Brevard County Panther and Cage viewing audience, are encouraged to comment. There are contributions that are welcome and they aid in the live stream. So feel free to like, comment, share these live streams or any other content that's presented on the Panther and Cage Facebook page. If this is your first time joining us, I would like to welcome you and your contributions, and I hope that you all enjoy. Welcome to Panther and Cage 3.5. Let me go ahead and get some things going. I know it's been a couple of weeks before we get to this Irish American diaspora in the effort of trying to explain or talk about the systemic racism that the certain members of our community swear does not exist. So we bring you this evidence to talk about, discuss, and even come to interaction and finding resolutions. So I know it's been a couple of weeks since we last saw each other. The last time we streamed, it was Panther and Cage 23. And before I get to that, let's go ahead and make sure all the equipment is where I work with new equipment, new setting, everything's new. Let me go ahead and try to get to this, make sure that we can share the screen. Yes. All right. Now, as I was saying, welcome to Panther and Cage 23.5. This will be a continuation of our last stream, which is Panther and Cage 23, Gatekeeping and Special Pleading. Tonight, we're going to try to continue covering a portion of the gatekeeping that we didn't get to cover because of the time constraints. Now, that portion deals with the history of America and the public pool gatekeeping that has occurred. This type of gatekeeping occurs very often, but it's rarely ever filmed because the classical conditioning that obscures the view of righteousness. Um, Recently, it's been cited as a rising trend, and I mean recently within the past year. But that assessment is inaccurate, and as you can see from the intro video, but it shows that the conversation has been stagnant for far too long. That is what it reveals. It's only because of the application of technology that the conversation is now being held in these dark corners of the internet, conversations around the dinner table. But it then makes news to those who have been unaware to the depths of the experience of racism in America. But as you saw from the opening video, this is a form of discrimination, and it's been a thing for over 57 years, well over 57 years. So the last show we talked about, we talked about the concept of special pleading and the concept of gatekeeping. Now, give me one moment here. I want to be able to make sure I get this correct. So I'm going to check something out. I said I'm working with new equipment, so make sure that everything is all right. Now, like I said, last stream, which is about 2 weeks ago, we talked about the concept of special pleading and gatekeeping. Now, we generally define gatekeeping as an activity or a behavior that limits or controls the general access to the, to something, right? Here we go. We'll make sure I keep that so you can see the whole definition. Yeah, it should be good. We saw it. If you want to see that too, that show, that's Panther Cage 23, go to the Panther Cage Facebook page and check out the last stream. I am also on YouTube, but you'll have to go by my real name, and that is Anthony Shuler Jr. And go to that YouTube channel and check that out if you want to stream it there. I know it's a lot easier to stream from YouTube than some people are streaming from Facebook. This stream from Facebook is mainly for the Let's Talk About It group. And that group was started on Facebook under Willie Taylor's page or Watchful Eye. And it evolved into a group where we were designated to be able to talk about anything. So, but if you want to go check that out, go check it out. There's several different places, the Panther Cage Facebook page, my YouTube channel, and you can always go to the Let's Talk About It group where you're free to comment, responsibly comment, I should say, about all the things that you're going to see on this show, all the things that we're going to talk about, and any conversations that these shows intersect with. So, but we define gatekeeping as an activity or behavior that limits or controls the general access to something, and how it spanned multiple fields of study. We were able to explore the concept of racial gatekeeping, and we saw a great historical example of this in the opening video. June 18th, 1964, at that Monson Motor Lodge in St. Augustine, Florida, captured all of that. And like the viral videos that capture many African Americans have been saying exist, the video of pool gatekeeping, the video of the pool gatekeeping incident in the summer of 1964 was viewed across the world. And that contribution of pressure influenced the signing of the 1964 Civil Rights Act. I believe that signed it into a bill. So we talked about technology last week, or last stream, we talked about technology exposing the social bigotry. And it appears that it's a source of faith for the Black man that moves about the country. Whether we want to discuss if that's a good thing or a bad thing, a sad thing, you're welcome to comment. But we defined and we explored the technique of special pleading also. Now, the concept of special pleading was being a fallacy, and it moves the goalpost to create certain exceptions when a racist claim is proven to be false in this context. So that is something that's commonly implemented by the likes of Joel Patrick, Charlie Kirk, Candace Owens. You see that all the time. Because of the actions of Jonathan Pentland, we were able to touch on the medical terminology when we talked a little bit about the differences between, and that was, give it a second, okay? No, we got delay sometimes. The Hodgkin's lymphoma and non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. Now, all of these are good to apply to your efforts to dismantle racism in America, all these concepts. But the opening video, as you saw, had quite a bit going on, and it prompts me to discuss a form of protest used to combat the pool gatekeeping. I'll move in pretty quickly because this is going to be a long show. I want to try to keep it under 2 hours. But that form of protest that they used to combat pool gatekeeping was called wade-in. Okay, now wade-in was to intervene or become involved in a protest, to enter it and begin walking through liquid, especially water. Wade-ins are a spin from the lunch counter sit-ins that became an infamous form of protest, like the nearby St. Augustine. I think it was back in Jacksonville. We talk about that nearby Axe Handle Saturday that happened 4 years prior to that incident. Okay, so you can see the wade-ins was kind of a spinoff from the sit-ins. So if you don't know what a wade-in is, simply Google it. If you don't know what a sit-in is, simply Google it. These terminology, these terms are used interchangeably within the civil rights discussion. Okay, so it's not anything new, is what I'm trying to say. But there's a lot. Okay, there's a lot to cover regarding this portion of countering pool gatekeeping. But I'm going to just allow you to responsibly watch the video attached to the link that I'm going to share, and I'm going to place that in the comments section. But it is a video. I'm not going to show it, but I'm just going to share it so you can go back and look at it. It's a Vox video, and it talks about how beaches and pools became a battleground for the U.S. civil rights. You know, it's about 15 minutes long, but I believe that it's an excellent resource to apply to the history of pool gatekeeping. So let me get a second. I'm going ahead and try to see if I can throw that in. It's going to be a YouTube link. Put that in the comment section, and hopefully that filters everywhere. Doesn't seem to be too long. And if you have any issues with seeing some of the comments or anything, please let me know. Because I'm streaming it to several different areas, it's kind of hard to keep track of it immediately, and I don't want to move forward and you guys aren't tracking what's going on. So right now that should be populating. I do see that it's populated to 2 places. Right now I'm trying to figure out why it didn't post to 2 other places that I wanted it to. So that's virtual. I don't know why it didn't let me, but show must go on. All right. Now the most recent example of pool gatekeeping occurred before Heather J. Brown posted a video taken by a bystander of an unnamed white woman grabbing her 7-year-old son to block him from entering a community pool. Now, the woman was just dubbed Pool Karen. She attempted to block Heather's son from the community pool during an incident that allegedly took place on July the 6th. Heather J. Brown, who goes by HJ_everyday on TikTok, posted the video, and the TikTok initially took it down due to a reported violation of community guidelines, but it was since uploaded again, and it racked up over 4 million views within 72 hours.
Yesterday, man, you know who I am. It's all my shoulder. I don't, right? I didn't understand you. Why didn't you fall? Don't you put your hands on my son? Take your sister right fucking now. Don't you ever put your hands on my son. Actually, I will call the police and I will have you arrested for putting your hands on a minor. That's what I'm going to say. Good. Get out of my face, lady. And I just fucking know you. Get the fuck out of my face. And you're going to jail because she just put her hands on my son. So I hope.
Now, you can hear the dispute regarding the authority to access and utilize the community pool, where Heather can be heard in the video saying, I was here yesterday, man. You know who I am. Now, the woman asked Heather, why isn't your key fob working? And that indicates that she was trying to enforce a restriction of access to the pool on top of the community pool security system that's already in place. Now you see the gate open and the little boy tried to get past her and she grabbed him. So Brown can be heard yelling, don't put your hands on my son. I will call the police and I will have you arrested for putting your hands on a minor. Brown begins dialing the police as she's heard saying, get out of my face, lady. And she's going to jail because she put her hands on my son. Now, a stranger at the pool filmed the interaction and later reportedly handed down the video over to Brown and the police. In addition, after the white woman reportedly, dubbed Karen, Pool Karen, attempted to tell the cops that Brown attacked her. So Brown said that the officer was starting to believe her at first based on just the way they all looked. But she found support in the woman who filmed the video. And the bystander who captured the altercation on video told Brown that, there allegedly had been some issues with the Homeowners Association pool committee with people singling out children who aren't white, with the woman in the clip having reportedly let 2 white children in ahead of Brown's kids who were told they had to wait outside. So you can see in the video, which I'm not going to replay the video, but I'll give you a chance to look at it when you go back later. But you'll see in that video where there's a young white male who looks disappointed and walks away when the woman moves to the gate in the beginning of the video. So he kind of walks away. You'll see that. I don't know if he was with her or not, but you can tell once the behavior started, once the gatekeeping behavior started, he kind of looked disappointed and walked away. So it seemed like that may have been a recurring thing, but that's all speculation. Now, Brown reportedly revealed news Heather Brown reportedly revealed news of the charges 5 weeks after the altercation with the unidentified woman. Okay. Now, Brown said that the woman at the pool had been charged for misdemeanor assault on a child under 12. Now, in a follow-up video posted, Brown explains that the family is now embroiled in court proceedings and they hope to prosecute the woman. But the woman in court, on July 30th, later that month, asked for a public defender and that there were plans to return to court this past August 20th. The white woman and 2 other women from the Homeowners Association had constantly harassed her landlord, and they were sending emails and spreading lies about Brown and her family. So I'll let you go ahead and take a look at that video so that you can see this, how this is turning out, or how this has turned out.
Okay, so here's an update. Y'all blew that shit up and it got deleted for community guidelines violation of minor safety or some bullshit like that. But the update is she was charged with a misdemeanor assault on a child under 12. This video is from July 6th. We went to court on July 30th. She requested a public defender. And of course, court was continued to August the 20th. So we go back August 20th and hopefully she is prosecuted and she learns a lesson, because when this video was taken, I didn't know it was being taken, but when the police officer came, I told him what happened And then he went to get her story, and her story was that I attacked her. Of course, the police officer was starting to believe her at first based on just the way we look. She's an older white lady, and her whole tone changed. She wasn't talking crazy or outside of her neck. She was talking like, you know, a typical old white woman. So I do know when I am mad, I don't care who you are. I'm going to say what I got to say. I don't give a fuck. But the police officer was believing her. But then there was a lady at the pool. She's the one that actually took the video. I didn't know she was taking it. But she took that video because there's been issues where people on the HOA pool committee, because there's 3 women and she's one of them, that single out children who aren't white. It just is what it is. Because this day she let 2 white boys in front of my kids, but told my kids they had to wait outside the gate. So anyways, I didn't give her the satisfaction of putting my hands on her like I wanted to. I caught myself because in the video you see me step back and go, actually, I'm gonna call the police because I did what she would have done to me. She would have played victim. She would have had every fucking charge you can think of thrown at me if I had put my hands on her like she wanted me to. And I'm just not gonna do that. You ain't gonna take me away from my kids. You ain't gonna fuck up my career. And you ain't gonna waste my money because I would have had to spend money to defend myself when in actuality you was in the fucking wrong. So we go to court. Ever since this video has been out and ever since charges have been pressed against her and 2 other women on the HOA that we've had issues with have constantly harassed my landlord, sending emails, spreading lies about me and my children. I don't care if my children are the devils themselves. You don't have the right to put your hands on nobody, let alone a child. That's what I kept telling her. And I told her, I don't know where the fuck you from, but where I'm from, you put your hands on somebody, you better get ready to fight, because, bitch, I'm going to knock you the fuck out. And just, she's lucky my kids were there, honestly. That is really what it boiled down to. She was lucky that I thought about my children and not, you know, me. Okay, so here's an update.
All right. Now, pretty lengthy video, but I just want to give you guys the update. I know that this is couple of weeks off, say that, but I got no new news about that. I did try to do a quick jump into it about a week ago, so if you do know any other updates, you're more than welcome to go ahead and share that. I'm going to go ahead and post the YouTube video. I'm going to post that 2 different places. There are a couple links that you saw while that video was streaming. I went ahead and placed that link in the comment section. That's just to catch up to these stories so you can, because this may be going a little too fast for you. I've been told I leave a few people sometimes, so you can go back at when it's convenient to you, and you'll be able to go ahead and to look at, you know, the source of this information. Now, I was unable to, like I said, I was unable to get a conclusive update, but you know, regardless, we talked about this form of gatekeeping, and we said that, you know, last week I told you that it was directly linked to the last stream, I should say. I told you it was directly linked to the attitudes that are associated with the historical discrimination against African Americans having access to beaches and pools. But before we dive further into that exploration, I want to look at another pool gatekeeping incident that's dating back 1 year.
I live here. 2218. I'm a sublease, so you want to look my name up?
Yeah, but
That's
even
fine.
so, we don't, come on, we can't have any guests.
But I live here.
Residents can't have guests.
So how you just gonna let her in and automatically assume
Because I know.
that I don't live here?
Because I know everybody that lives here.
You don't know everybody that live here because I live here. Just because you ain't met me don't mean that I don't live here. And that's very rude of you to just assume that I don't live here. Is there a problem? Is there a reason that you just assume that I don't live here? A black woman doesn't live here, but you can let this white woman in and assume that she lives here. It is about that. Clearly, because you see three young women of color walk up to you, and we say that we're coming to the pool, and you stop us before we even get into the door to speak to anyone.
Since you haven't come in and done your paperwork.
I have done my paperwork. I've been living here since March, paying rent since March. So how are you going to tell me? You stopped me before I even get to the door to speak to anyone.
I said we don't have any guests.
Now, a white woman at a student apartment complex in Tennessee named Knox Ridge Apartments was also placed on a disciplinary leave after that racially charged discriminating against that Black resident and her friends. Okay, the exchange in the exchange in which this Knox Ridge Karen blocks the group from accessing the off-campus housing complex's swimming pool. This was caught on video, and it subsequently went viral. And in that video, you saw the woman continually blocking the Black woman, whose Twitter handle was at Royal, spelled ROYAL_E, and her guest from the building, while at the same time she was letting the white person walk right by, and she let that white person walk right in without challenging their right to be there, no questions asked, right? Now, the resident told the Knox Ridge Karen, is what I'm calling her, that she did live there and she gave her apartment number. If you go back and look at the video, you hear that she clearly explained that. And I watched some of these videos several times, so I want to make sure that I'm accurate as to what I'm saying. You may not catch it the first time. There are some things that I did catch the second time around. But for time constraints, I'm not going to just keep showing the same video. We will do that if we do a classic Panther and Cage breakdown. But my host and I have been kind of busy with a lot of things. And as you can see, I got a new setup here. So the lighting, I don't really like it, but it's something new. I'm trying to work it. So sometimes it gets too bright. Trying to work some things. But like I said, we'll do a classic Panther and Cage breakdown of these incidents. And you as the viewing audience, you get an opportunity to be able to ask those questions about it, or even talk about those issues if you want us to break those down. We'll be more than happy to do that, provided that we get the time, because this is very time consuming and we have a lot of things going on in our personal lives. Like I said, the resident told Knox Ridge Karen that she did live there and her apartment number. She stated that she's been subleasing and requested that Karen look her name up in the system, but that didn't even make that Karen budge. All right, now Knox Ridge Karen then says, "Yeah, but we can't have any guests," being adamant. And she then says this while at the very same time she allowed a white resident, or what we assume because of our firsthand knowledge of the video, as it was a white resident, and she walked right past me. And then she says residents can have guests. That insinuated, that the Knox Ridge Karen did not believe the Black resident was a resident, because the Black resident telling her that she's been subleasing her apartment, or that she was going to be, obliging the resident's request to confirm that she, in fact, was a resident of the Knox Ridge apartment community. She didn't even budge, remember? So before I go forward, I want to go ahead and check out something. I do see a comment, and I want to make sure, because of this setup. Trying to see where that is. Probably somebody just doing a reaction. Let me see if I can. Good evening, Vanessa. So, all right, let me get back to. Thank you for your contribution. But as we go forward, the Knox Ridge Karen just stood there at the door, and you saw her literally gatekeeping, in a very comfortable stance that showed, that she felt righteous in her assumption that the resident at Royal E's claim was false. So when that fact that the Knox Ridge Karen allowed the white person to walk past her, assuming that they were a resident, an obvious bias, the Karen says, because I know everyone that lives here and I never met you. Now, what that means is that there were levels of discriminatory behavior there that just potentially it had gone right there in just a moment. And sometimes this happens. A lot of people say racism does exist, but sometimes you gotta, You really have to be able to look at it. You have to stand back. You have to know what you're experiencing. And this is why we do some of these streams, so that we kind of break down and analyze some of these incidents, so that we can see them for what they are, what they may not be, and what they may actually be if we can't tell exactly what it is. But it is something that seems oblivious to some people who claim to be colorblind, but it's obviously, I mean, it's completely obvious to people of color. All right. Now, Karen says that the Knoxville, Knox Ridge, I should say, the Knox Ridge Karen, she says, I know everybody that lives here and I never met you, as if there's this standard of everyone specifically meeting her in order to be given the benefit of the doubt of having residents within the community. That's another issue, right? So you can see how this is like compounding levels on levels of, her just making excuses, and it's just not working out. It's not having logic there. So there's a potential evidence of housing discrimination right there, which was another topic of discussion. Okay, but remember, this is evidence of housing discrimination, right? Now, when you look up the Knox Ridge Apartments, you do not see any requisite that states that they must be vetted through this particular unidentified Knox Ridge Karen. I just wanted to make sure I checked the website and looked and said, see if there was a specific someone that you had to meet, and I know sometimes when you're meeting with these leasing agents, a lot of times they introduce you as you're signing that lease or whatnot, and that's usually really like informal, because formally what they're doing is they're going to talk about it. No one leasing agent in an office, like a specialist student housing, is just going to, process all this paperwork and not talk about it with her coworkers. They all have to work interchangeably. So to anyone out there who think they may want to throw out an excuse of, oh, well, maybe this happened or maybe they didn't inform or whatever, well, then you're now admitting that they're not doing their job. So, I mean, there's no way to wiggle out of this one. I looked at this very, several times, and there's just no way around this one, right? So when you look up Knox Ridge Apartments, like I said, you don't see any requisites that state that they must be vetted by this particular unidentified, Knox Ridge Karen or any others that may be on the staff, right? But somehow she assumed that something is general, that this expectation is generally known to be the standard practice, and she's using this, or instituting, okay, she's instituting that practice to adjudicate who has the legitimate access to that community. Now, you can see this as gatekeeping. You can see how this gatekeeping that she's conducting, you can see how that can be considered racist. I'm pretty sure you can. So you don't. Let's go ahead and go through this process. I want to make sure that I get this correct. These are here to help you as well as help me get along through the show. Now, okay. Now, the instituting of power to grant access control, okay? And clearly this is evidence of racial discrimination. This earlier Knox Ridge Apartments incident is an evidence of racial discrimination, and it gives credence to the definition of racism that we continue to try to express so that everyone who uses the term uses it appropriately. And let me go ahead and show that. It's important that we sometimes we run back to these definitions. Now, this is an old slide, and everyone knows that. Everyone's seen this image before. So I have to go back to this because sometimes, like I said, there are some people who tend to miss this. And we'll keep, showing this because we have to show this because of the general consensus of the group about a year ago stated that they didn't believe that racism existed and that, everything was racist, and some people are using it, too much. And I do believe there is a heightened sensitivity to the word, but here it is again, so that you can clearly see it. Down towards the bottom of the screen where it says it is further the use of that racist belief to institutionalize that ideology into a web of interlocking institutions creating influence or power. Now, what I said, the power to grant access to a building, the power to grant access to a school, power to grant access to housing, to a public community pool or beach, right? Access control. Access control is defined as the condition in which the common law rights of property owners and others to access light, air, or view in connection with a public road or controlled by public authority by means of physical construction, legal restrictions, toll requirements, and other limitations. That's the definition of access control. You can go ahead and go to dictionary.com, Merriam-Webster Dictionary, check it out. You will get that definition if you missed that. But I want to state the physical obstruction that occurs as a result of these gatekeeping acts aren't performed by legitimate common law rights holding property owners. Okay, that's the one thing that you're going to start to notice. I'm going to get this off the screen for you. I think you guys have seen it enough so that we can get this correct. But like I said, each time that you're seeing this like the pool Karen from the very first video or the very first incident of the recent incidents before the Knox Ridge, and then, you know, with the addition of the Knox Ridge, you both see them, you know, perform this physical obstruction, and it occurs. They aren't the legitimate common law rights holding property owners. Now, given the Knox Ridge Karen, she may have some access to, or some authority to be able to limit the access to who has, you know, who. But when someone says they're residents, I'm pretty sure that there's a normal way to actually to go about that. Like I said, never received the benefit of the doubt. But let's take another look at the Knox Ridge Karen in action, right? Because I don't want to be presumptuous here. We've already kind of labeled this. This was racial discrimination, housing discrimination. This was a gatekeeping incident. But I like to try to be objective, try to look deeper into some things, and this is just part of the process.
I live here. 2218. I'm a sublease, so you want to look my name up?
Yeah, but
That's
even
fine.
so, come on, we can't have any guests.
But I live here.
Residents can't have guests.
So how you just gonna let her in and automatically assume
Because I know.
that I don't live here?
Because I know everybody that lives here.
You don't know everybody live here, because I live here. Just because you ain't met me don't mean that I don't live here. And that's very rude of you to just assume that I don't live here. Is there a problem? Is there a reason that you just assume that I don't live here? A black woman doesn't live here, but you can let this white woman in and assume that she lives here.
You don't know everybody that lives here because I live here. Just because you don't remember me doesn't mean that I don't live here. Very valid points. It's just very rude of you to just assume that I don't live here. Is there a problem? Is there a reason you just assume that I don't live here? A black woman doesn't live here, but you can just let this white woman in assuming that she lives here. So you can see all those questions were legitimate, okay? It says you can tell that the black resident, you know, became triggered, right? And when the white woman walked past the Knox Ridge Karen, because of the questioning, you know, how the questioning just rolled off her tongue, you could tell what was happening here. And in addition, what you were seeing at that moment was, you know, the black resident, she was trying to rationalize what had just transpired. So this is what triggered her, okay? And the mental process here can be scarring, but it's not taken into account or even discussed at the mental health level, okay? And this is why mental health professionals in my opinion, need to be paying close attention so that they're accurately assessing what transpires within this kind of encounter. Now, before I go further, I wanted to actually, because I did some thinking about this and actually came up with something, came to a conclusion on something today because of a personal experience, but I won't talk about that personal experience. I just want to say, had this perspective, and this perspective was about American racism or racism in America. I'm trying to check and make sure that I got no comments or anything as I move forward. So give me a moment to be able to check this out. But this is going to be a comment that I feel like, actually, I'm going to place it in the comment section too. Sorry, catching up on the comments. Okay. No. Apologize for the delay. Working between two or three different platforms, it gets kind of sticky here when you're trying to make sure you're checking 2 or 3 different rooms for comments. Seeing old between 2 or 3 different devices, you'll see old comments pop up, and it'll make you believe that there's a current comment, but it's not. So, all right. And like I said, when we talk about mental health and we talk about, what this actually does, we talk about the mental health level of what is occurring when you have these incidents, how they can be scarring. And I did mention to a friend of mine about how this is kind of like a PTSD, but I don't really want to go on record of saying that just yet, if I can say it. But to actually go into the discussion about that is very, very deep. And we did that on Panther and Cage. I do believe it was like 9 or something. Or we did talk about mental health, and I think we got over to the mental health for veterans. Not that we came to a conclusion, so we're welcome to talk about that at any time, but it's going to be a deep level for tonight. But I do want to say that mental health professionals need to be paying attention, because one of the things that is exclusive to this country is American racism. And that's why I say American racism, not global, but it could be global. But I'm going to make a statement on American racism causing one to doubt himself or herself. And it causes the victim to ultimately undervalue themselves. It causes them to undervalue their potential and their potential to be a productive contributor to society, especially when we're talking about American society, because American society prides itself on as it's the leader of the world's functioning government. It's always, America's the best, America's the greatest. We hear this. But what this does to the African American is it does scar them. And it does cause them to doubt themselves if they're not strong enough. There are some people who are strong enough. And these are the individuals that you'll hear when someone says unapologetically Black. Unapologetically, there's a lot packed in there, okay? But just leave it as it is, because there's no reason why African Americans should be apologizing for experiencing racism, okay? That's another conversation. That's another topic. We'll touch on it. I just want to make sure that here during this moment, you see her getting triggered. And it's pretty hard to control yourself, because I know that narrative that Charlie Kirk likes to put out is that Black people can't control their behavior. But in an incident like this, I don't think there's an expectation for her to watch her behavior. She's simply reacting. So often here, like I said, with Panther and Cage, we do talk about, mental health of African Americans, and we do it in a very segmented platform, try to differentiate the needs of the Black man versus the needs of the Black woman. I personally said that mental health is not, is not ready to meet the needs of African Americans. It's not, I know for a fact it's not ready to meet the needs of African American men, speaking from a place of extensive experience, okay? But we have to take our time and walk into all these conversations, and that our eyes, get peeled back as we're monitoring and analyzing these kinds of incidents. And we have to keep our minds open, okay? Now, because just like the incident that we're reviewing right now, there's so much going on in order to effectively deal with every single compounding issue. And we're going to have to understand that complexity in each of the actions that are actually happening with this one particular Knox Ridge incident, Knox Ridge Apartments incident, is similar to that of others that everyone mistakenly labels as some sort of phenomenon. Now, these counters are not a phenomenon. They're evidence of a racial discriminatory history of America being alive and well. It's just no longer overt, okay? Well, actually, incidents like this seem pretty overt. It just depends on your experience. But that's why, these kinds of incidents usually end up with an apology. And then there's this expectation of this acceptance of the apology, which is another issue. I'm not cool with that. But, after the trigger line of questions that we saw, Knox Ridge Karen, she said it's not about that, and it's dismissive denial of reasoning, okay, of what had just transpired right before that Black resident's, face. It's like a slap in the face, clearly, right? And I'm saying that, because the lack of logic that's behind the reasoning, as evidenced by what Karen didn't, the Knox Ridge Karen didn't say, and also by what followed, okay? She said this, she said, "You haven't clearly done your paperwork, or I would have knew you." Now, that's what she said, okay? So she doubled down on all the comments that she stated, right? And she says, it's because you didn't finish your paperwork, right? So paperwork. Just remember this for a second, right? Remember on the last stream, we talked about slave papers. And I hope you guys remember that, if you are active watchers. Amber, I know I think you watched the last one, but I know you probably remember when I talked about slave paper, right? And if anyone else, like I said, if you guys don't, I invite you guys to review all the previous live streams from the last stream. And I usually try to stream on Sunday night. Sometimes I get locked into work, like I did this last Sunday. So I had lighting issues the previous Sunday. As you can see, I kind of got something new going on here. But listen to the explanation of why these challenging incidents of gatekeeping are difficult for African Americans living here in America. Now, these are real issues that escape politics, and the real issues that get kicked to the back burner in those national discussions. And we see TV hosts shy away from this. They shy away from this dialogue, that can occur when we start talking about the dynamics of these incidents, like these gatekeeping incidents that continue to happen, right? But I really caught on camera and exposed to the general media, which I'm doing now, these types of incidents, they really make up a large portion of the necessary conversation that always gets averted. I've been saying that for a year and a half now, and it gets avoided by the media pundits. They're all pretending to have this discussion about race in America, which is why you see no resolution, right? Now, the Black resident in that Knox Ridge incident, she's reacting from being triggered by this racial discriminatory incident, and she immediately responds to the Knox Ridge Karen. It's about that. Remember, she said it's not about that. She said, clearly, because you see 3 young women of color walk up to you and we say we're coming to the pool and you stop us before we even get to the door. To that Knox Ridge Karen is heard on the video, and this is possibly saying, I don't know. She said, I I know everybody, either which you haven't come in and done your paperwork right, or B, you haven't, come in and done your paperwork right. So you heard that. You might want to go back and check it out. But check this out. We're going to talk about privilege and paperwork, just so we can try to go down that avenue.
It is about that. Clearly, because you see three young women of color walk up to you, and we say that we're coming to the pool, and you stop us before we even get to the door to speak to anyone.
Then you haven't come in and done your paperwork, right?
I have done my paperwork. I've been living here since March, paying rent since March. So how are you going to tell me? You stop me before I even get to the door to speak to anyone.
I said we don't have any.
I don't even.
I wasn't 100% sure that she said that, but it was reported that she called her a bitch. Now, the report said that when the video went viral, there was a Mr. Krabs spinning meme that was used in a tweet with the caption that said, yes, she called a Black resident who pays rent and had been resorting to name calling a bitch. I'm going to go ahead and show you the meme that I'm talking about, because I know when I knew what it was. Many people may know what it is, but I want to be clear so that everyone else gets to see it. You've seen this meme before, sure. Now, like I said, it had the Mr. Krabs spinning meme from Mr. Krabs from SpongeBob SquarePants, and it was used in a tweet. And they said, yes, she called a Black resident who pays rent and had resorted to name calling, called her a bitch. I don't know if that was true or if that was witch. Not sure. I did do some digging and I couldn't find anything else other than how this is going to, how a report, how it's going to resolve itself. Right? Now, the Black resident then reiterated something that she had already said twice before, adding the comment that she'd been living there since March, paying rent since March, and the Black resident requested again for sufficient reasonings. So, as to why she was stopped at the front door before she could even walk in, and the video abruptly ended right there. Now, it was important to understand that that Knox Ridge Karen apartment, or the Knox Ridge apartment community, is off-campus housing, okay? And that is housing for students who are enrolled in the University of Tennessee. So this may just be an opportunity where college students are looking to unwind, at the pool. So this is not like this is just, I've never seen these people coming here or what, you're going to have a lot of visitors when you're dealing with college. And this hands down, you know that, all right? Now, a quick jump forward to the conclusion of this incident, that the Knox Ridge Karen was placed on a disciplinary leave, while Knox Ridge Apartment Administration, they look into the incident for further review. But before we end here, we're going to look at another opportunity for the explanation. Like I said, I'm going to look this whole thing in to provide, we're going to look for an opportunity for an explanation that's going to be provided by the Knox Ridge Karen herself, okay?
A supervisor or something.
I'm giving you the email right now.
That's fine. I'm glad you're writing it, because I can't believe I was racially profiled at my place where I live.
You weren't.
I was, because when a young Black woman walks up trying to get in the pool, you tell her residents only, and you don't even know me. So I was.
You weren't.
You just assumed that she didn't live here because of what then?
No,
What reason did you assume that she didn't live? Because clearly we had to call to make an appointment to even walk up here. So clearly we already got the details of the people that's coming up here.
But that's not the point. We're not talking about them. We're talking about me. How did you know that I didn't live here? How can you tell me that I don't live here? What about me makes you think that I didn't live here?
Because you have not been to the office.
Do I have to come to the office? Why? Why? If my paperwork was done. If y'all gotten y'all rent the whole time I've been here, why do you need to see me at the office? Why do you have to stop me but not stop the other young woman, the young white woman, when she walk in and tell her she can come?
For 2 years.
Okay, I don't care. I don't care.
So we saw from that video that the black president and her guests, hear them in the background. You hear them giving further examination of the act of gatekeeping that occurred, along with a request requesting an email address of the Knox Ridge Karen supervisor, and that was so that they could lodge a formal complaint regarding the racial profiling. But the Knox Ridge Karen continues to deny that she racially discriminated against any black residents and her guests. Now, she intended to use a few excuses that didn't seem to give justice or reasoning to her previous gatekeeping behavior. And the Knox Ridge Karen then acknowledged that she did make an assumption that the black resident did not live there because the guests weren't residents. Now, this still does not provide adequate reasoning for her discriminatory behavior because the policy would allow the guests to have access with the requirement of the resident being present. And that usually how apartment community standards rules for pools and poolside premises occur. That's how it goes. I think everybody knows that. Now, the Knox Ridge Karen's assumption was justified in her mind because she claimed that the black resident had not been to the office, which still does not line up with any sort of justification outside of the Karen basically abusing her authority. Now, trying to use her authority in connection with just her eyesight to gatekeep, just her eyesight to adjudicate the legitimacy of of the residency of the black tenant. It just sounds crazy. But much transpires in that moment. And it's very confusing with the whole bombardment of questions from the black resident to the Knox Ridge Karen. And you start to see that at the end of the conclusion of the previous video. But we're only able to make out the conclusion of this incident at the end of this video that I'm about to show. When the guests lodge, these very logical questions.
Your initial assumption should not have been, oh, residents only. You don't live here.
You should ask, are you a resident? Why don't you ask, are you a resident first?
Which you did not do, exactly. There's no more explanation needed, ma'am. Sorry that you fucked up the first time.
We just would like the email and we'll talk to the supervisor on our own.
The most logical question, why didn't you ask, are you a resident first? Simple respect. And that's just the dash procedure that, could have brought the whole entire incident to this point. And, at that point, in silence, you saw the Knox Ridge Karen. She knew that she overstepped her legal and moral boundaries. She knew she abused her authority just to keep these black residents from, or I should say this black resident and her guests from utilizing the community pool. Now, the day after the video was posted, the student apartment complex tweeted that Karen was placed on a disciplinary leave as well, let me go ahead and I'll show it to you so you guys can see it as opposed to hearing. I know sometimes you don't just hear my voice. Let me go ahead and show you. Like I said, the Knox Ridge Karen was placed on a disciplinary leave as it reviewed the matter further. Knox Ridge is aware of the incident that occurred yesterday involving a staff member and resident. And we placed the employee on disciplinary leave while we review the matter further. Then states, as a community, we absolutely have no tolerance. Get that on the screen so I was going to delay. Right? We absolutely have no tolerance for discrimination, inadvertent or otherwise. We intend to revisit the training program for all of our staff in order to do our part to prevent situations like this from happening in the future. Our top priority, let me go ahead and make sure that's correct. Our top priority our top priority is ensuring our residents feel at home and welcome. And that was the Knox Ridge Apartments. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to clear this out. We're done with this one, but I'm going to post the source where I get this information from. So here's a link to the reported incident that I gave. And I have yet to find any more information. But like I said, it's been about 2 weeks since I looked at this, but I've yet to find out who this parent is and what the actual final conclusion beyond what Knox Ridge Apartment intended to review, instead of their, other than their intent to review their training program. Apologize about that. A lot going on. Let's see. Do a comment here. There's a link. Didn't work out so well on the YouTube side. We do have a comment. Yeah. I have no idea why she was just, why she was so adamant about, blocking them out. I don't know, maybe she was going to take some personal pleasure. I am not 100% sure. And I'm trying to see, I don't see who actually made that comment because I have an issue with it. Yep, that's Vanessa. How you doing, Vanessa? I have no idea. I really don't. I really feel like she just had a personal stake in it. It was something personal that she wanted to do. But when we talk about what someone stands to gain or lose when it comes to acts of racism, it's a very long conversation. It's one that's very interesting. One day I hope to actually, there's a group that I want to actually see if they're going to explore that. That might be extremely interesting. But I said earlier that gatekeeping was directly linked to the attitudes that are associated with historical discrimination against African Americans, and then African Americans having access to pools and beaches, public pools and public beaches, right? Now, here's where this is all, what I've talked about for an hour now. This is where it's going to become relevant, all right? I'd like to thank Kristen for giving me access to bringing this to my attention. Now, Heather McGee is an African-American author of a book that is called The Sum of Us, right? She is also an NBC News political commentator who has been known to provide expert commentary on MSNBC news panels regarding the racial inequality in America. She's labeled an expert strategist who, according to this TED Talk designs, or according to TED Talk, she designs and promotes these solutions to the inequality in America. Now, showing what individuals, governments, and private sector can do to help the country live up to its ideals is a goal of hers. Now, if you don't recognize her here, let us take a look at her. We've seen her before, but let us take a look at her promoting her new book.
Are looking at how racism hurts the economy and affects all Americans. Author and economic policy analyst Heather McGee explores this in her new book. It's called The Sum of Us, What Racism Costs Everyone and How We Can Prosper Together. We took a look at what this actually means for Americans' wallets. The wage gap between white and black Americans has widened in the past 20 years to roughly $33,000 per household, and we all pay a price for it. McKinsey & Company, for example, predicts that the wealth gap will drain. We are looking at how racism hurts the economy and affects all Americans. Author and economic policy analyst Heather McGee explores this in her new book. It's called The Sum of Us, What Racism Costs Everyone and How We Can Prosper Together. We took a look at what this actually means for Americans' wallets. The wage gap between white and black Americans has widened in the past 20 years to roughly $33,000 per household, and we all pay a price for it. McKinsey & Company, for example, predicts that the wealth gap will drain at least $1 trillion out of the U.S. economy annually over the next decade. And that translates into a loss of $2,800 or more for every American. Heather McGhee is an author and economic policy analyst who traveled across the country investigating the ways racism hurts more than just people of color. At an auto factory in Mississippi, for instance, she found workers trying to organize into a union to get higher pay, health coverage, and a pension. But one white worker told her if black employees were in favor, they would be against it. Another believed that if you help black people succeed, you're pushing down white people. In the end, McGhee says the union vote failed, and so did the push for a better deal for all. And Heather McGhee joins us now. Heather, good morning to you. This book is a tremendous accomplishment, and there's one line in particular that I love. You say that wealth is where history shows up in your wallet. But the costs of this racism for all of us go beyond just the money in our wallet. So I was hoping you could give us some additional examples. I love in particular the one of the swimming pool.
Yeah. You know, I wrote this book to figure out why it is that we sort of can't seem to have nice things in this country. And one of those nice things is the public swimming pools. We used to have nearly 2,000 in America. And I traveled to one of the many towns in the country that drained their public swimming pool because it was segregated. And when the civil rights movement allowed black Americans to say, hey, we pay for that pool too, let us swim too, instead of integrating it, they drained it. Of course, that meant that communities, all communities, lost out. And in many ways, it feels like America has done that time and time again, that we've had this ambivalence about sharing our nation across lines of race. And so it's cost us all economically.
Now, I apologize for that video starting over, but I was trying to put up this banner you see down here at the bottom. What I've noticed is that when I show any videos that are longer than like a minute, they do tend to hold and freeze my video. So they limit the view, which is another reason for viewership being down. I don't know if I've been shadow banned, but I do know that they do limit the audience because of the content. So I wanted to make sure that we have to show that banner down below, especially while we're showing the video, so that they do understand and know that we are sharing this with the intent to educate. So sorry I had to explain that, but I did start over that video. And I know that, you know, it going into generational wealth is another issue, but you know, that interview, what you just saw was just a portion of that interview that you just saw was just the first part of the promotional interview for Heather McGhee's book. You know, but you heard that assessment that wealth is where history is showing up in your wallet, and it's very relevant. Now, literally, your legal tender does hold pictures of dead presidents. Okay, so don't nobody think that that's a bunch of hogwash or, you know, whatever. But allegory, but allegorically. It reveals the existence of what, you know, historically has been used to build wealth in America. Now, slave owners, right? Here again, allegorically, this concept that she mentioned reveals the existence of what historically has been used to build wealth in America, and that's slave owners. Now, the whole video covered so many different examples of socioeconomic discrimination. But I want to introduce you to the history of gatekeeping and pools. So, you know, we can revert to the issues discussed in the entire video at another time. But when we, you know, we can go more in depth about the racism hurting the economy, generational wealth, and the negative narratives that underscored, you know, and perpetuated the economic depravity that we are dealing with today. Now, Heather recently appeared on the Psychology podcast with Scott Barry Kaufman, and they were discussing the concept of racism costing everyone. And, you know, they posed solutions to how America can prosper together after examining the historical concepts, like the consequences of gatekeeping of pools in America.
And in some of us, I have a story that kind of is a memorable way for us to think about that. which is what happened to public swimming pools. We used to have these grand resort-style pools in America that were publicly funded and that were, could hold thousands of swimmers at a time. And many of them were segregated and for whites only, not just in the South, but across the country. And once integration in the civil rights movement promised to let Black families swim too, many towns across the country drained their public pools rather than integrate them. And so what that meant was that white families also lost out on the pool, so did Black families. It meant that what was once a public good then became a private luxury, right? If you were rich enough to build a backyard swimming pool, you could still swim, or if you could join a private fee-based membership swimming club, which cropped up all over the country. And I used that story of the drained pool to talk about what happened to a country that had found the formula for middle-class prosperity, right? High wages, high levels of labor unions and collective bargaining, a minimum wage that reached its peak in 1968, high levels of taxation on the marginal kind of last dollar income of millionaires, and big public investments like free college. Government used to pick up the tab for college, and all of that had a racial asterisk. It was for whites only.
Now, you heard Heather talk about the history of public pools in America. She said that at one point, America had as many as 2,000 public swimming pools across America. And that she traveled to one of the towns that not only drained their swimming pools, but they filled it in. Yeah, filled it in with concrete to resist integration in America. And that display of racism cost all American communities. Now, that kind of attitude, let me ask a question. Now, what kind of attitude do you all think, that, went into that kind of act of filling in the pools with concrete? I mean, there's racism, and then there's like this deliberate, overt, intentional, like where does that occur? Because that does help us define, when we talk about, is America a racist country, or that question is being asked, and you have two different sides that are having this conversation, and then there are a couple other sides that are just quiet. Asian American community won't talk about that, but it was Stop Asian Hate a couple months ago, right? But I'm not going to go there. All right. Just want to just ask that question: what kind of attitude do y'all think y'all believe went into that kind of act? Now, let's think about what that means to African Americans in the workplace back then. And it meant that they were participating in these slim number jobs that were offered to them, right? And that meant that they too were also paying taxes, even those hard slim number jobs they were getting. They were paying into the American tax system, right? And so their contributions also contributed to those public swimming pools that serviced American communities throughout the country. Now, you heard Heather McGhee. She stated that early in her career, she used her position at a think tank to assess these issues that were the result of racial inequalities that were rising at that time. Give me a second, because we're going to talk. Let me get closer. I know you guys want to see my face. See my face. Ever see my face, Jasper? Now, a think tank is a research institute that performs research and advocacy concerning topics such as social policy, political strategy, economics, military, technology, and culture. Now, let me just ask this question: how many members of our County community are using their position, whether it is to assess these issues that may be the result of racial inequalities? I mean, that's a real legitimate question. I want to know that. You ain't got to answer it now. Just do it later. Just let that be a main thing, because I'm going to pose that as a question in the Let's Talk About It group. I doubt anyone will respond, because they know they can't can't BS me like they've been trying to do for the past couple they've done in the past. So pretty much, I really want to know the answer to this stuff. How many members of the Brevard County community are using their position to assess the issues that may result or may be the result of racial inequality? I'm going to make sure I try to see if I can ask that question. I'm going to post it now. Nope, I'll wait so I can phrase it in a way that it's a question as opposed to just, a note that I have here. But there was a job that I was recently working on with a cousin of mine, okay? This is about 2 weeks ago. It was a very affluent neighborhood in Cocoa Beach. Now, as we were looking out to the distance, we saw this golf course, and then we noticed one of the most quiet police traffic stops that we ever saw. Didn't even know he was pulled over. We happened to look, we saw the lights. But the conversation between, my cousin and I, as we continued working, was I made this assessment, to him, from here, you really can't see the impact of racial inequality. Took a look at took this panoramic view of the whole area. And, from this literal view, I told him from this literal view, you're sheltered away from that perspective that's necessary to actually see and understand the impact of racial inequality. But that question, how many members of the Brevard County community, going back to it, are using their position, whether it is to assess the issues may be the result of racial inequalities? That perspective, that view, keeps the people who lived in that community from seeing the racial inequalities. So the position of being, in the, let's say, Brevard County commissioner, I won't say city leaders because I know that certain cities are viewing, they get a closer look. But let's talk about the county commissioner. Now, from that position, from that perspective, do they use their position to assess or to look? Can they see the racial inequalities from that view? Just a legitimate question. I do believe I have a comment. Let me see if someone answered. Oh, so I was telling a story about, a cousin of mine. We were working and needed his help on his job. And we looked out and we were in a very affluent neighborhood. And there was a golf course. And the golf course was pretty much, all in the background. We did see a police stop and it was quiet. And then we talked about the normal, hey, what it's like when you get pulled over. He told me that somebody pulled him over in Titusville, and that officer said that he said something weird to him, and then he said I see shake on the floor and was trying to get him out of the car. And he laughed, he said, because he was like, I don't smoke. So he said that shake he thought he saw. And I was just, so we talked about it a little bit, but I said, either way, I said, did he yell at you, blah, blah, so we were just talking about that traffic stop being, very quiet, one of the most quiet traffic stops that we've ever seen. And looking at it and just doing a comparison, we looked at the entire perspective and I said, from this perspective, it's pretty hard to see racial inequalities. So I'm saying, how many members of the Brevard County community, as in like the Brevard County commissioners, are using their position, whether it is to assess the issues? So are they just looking to assess it, to looking just to see it? Or if they're actually doing something about it. And I'm not talking about that, you got to vote, They did that, 2 years ago, this whole vote thing, and then you voted, and what's going on? I still see Melbourne. I mean, I know Melbourne's police chiefs really were adamant about certain things, but I can tell you from personal experience, they're kind of like a gang. And I don't really know too much about them. I'm just saying from the limited, from what I could see, from what he says, it's different. I'm not saying that's on the police chief. What I'm saying is their behavior is like a game. And I don't want to go into detail about that now, but we will talk about that later because I got a whole police brutality that series is coming up, but we ain't talking about that till we get done with this stuff about the ghettos and the systemic racism, the black on black crime. When I had all that, like I said, we got to take our time with these conversations. We can't just run everywhere like everybody else loves to do, shotgunning here on Facebook, and half of them not knowing what they're talking about. And I say that because half of the stuff last year that they were talking about, I lived in the hood, and I didn't see any of those people there. And I know what goes down, and I know that it doesn't affect, like a drive-by in Cocoa does not affect Vieira. And if you want to say that it affects Vieira, get in the comments right now and tell me how it affects Vieira. Because I'm not going to deal with those negative narratives, not at all, perpetuating a lie. So what I'm saying is, I'm asking the question is, from a Brevard County community member or county commissioner position, how many of them are using that position to either assess the issues or do anything about any issues that may be the result of racial inequalities? Just a question. Let's see if there are any comments. If they're not, okay. All right. Now, I don't want anybody to think that, that the issue that, we were just talking about earlier, that Heather McGee was actually talking about earlier. I don't want anybody to think that this issue isn't true or that it's fake news, because we talked about, Franklin Theodore Roosevelt's, we talked about FDR's New Deal, right? And we talked about what the New Deal meant for American homeowners being a part of the new middle class suburban ideal. We talked about that in Panther and Cage. I can't remember the number, but I think it was 19. But it was redlining gentrification. Now we talked about Levittown, also Levittown, Pennsylvania, and the historical racial discrimination that transpired there. Now we how it further contributed to the racial animosity that we see it still exists today with housing discrimination. And we'll talk about that more in depth soon. And of course, seeing this, in this previous video, how it uses the racial wealth gap in America as a prelude to discussing all these issues. And we see that these issues are intertwined, and they're intertwined to reveal systemic racism, okay? Apologize, I just realized that this think tank comment was up past the point of me defining it. Now, we've been hitting on this, like I said, for a year now, about a good 6 months of exploring examples of systemic racism's existence in modern day America. Now, the mindset that it did not exist permeated the Let's Talk About It group, and we were challenged before we even called this Panther and Cage. We were challenged to prove the existence of it, right? I believe that was Doug Reich and I can't remember the other guy's name. But they challenged us to prove that systemic racism existed. Quentin had a presentation he was supposed to show Willie Taylor, and it was just like, this is such a headache, because we knew that, like I said, we're about 6 months out from that. We knew that this was a very massive project. We didn't want to just, throw it out there and say, we're not going to do that, because this conversation tends to come up and we keep going across it. And we get a little tired of hearing the same old thing. But anyway, that was because we had, that conversation occurred because we journeyed over from a conversation of reparations to generational wealth. And those individuals who I will call our detractors thought that, my co-hosts and I were not up to sharing the information. And we were up to it in an effort to resolve the negative attitudes that were being perpetuated in that group, and that was, being perpetuated about the biggest problems in the Black community, because Willie Taylor said the biggest problem in the Black community is, and we got a litany of just, I don't even want to relive that, all right? So we saw that African Americans were contributing to this country because they were now supposed to share in that wealth, right? But immediately they were denied that privilege. We talk about white privilege, but they were denied that white privilege opportunity by filling in the pools with concrete. And a lot of that was so that African Americans could not come into their communities. A lot of that was due to that. And that attitude, like I said, is also directly connected to the gatekeeping that we covered last show and pool gatekeeping that we're covering tonight. Now, I'm going to go ahead and post this link for this podcast. Take a listen to it. It's about an hour and 15 minutes, I believe. When you get a chance, if you want to hear more from Heather McGee talking about, some of the things that she will discuss in her book, The Sum of Us, and get this comment in the comment section. I did listen to this podcast twice, and I do think there was a member of a group that I'm hoping will come to terms of doing some work in the community. But she hosted that podcast, and I found it to be interesting. So I'll post that, and I'm going to post another link so that you can go ahead and support Scott Barry Kaufman's psychology podcast. Because I don't want to just rip him off or anything. I'm just trying to share the information that was covered. Okay. Now, I'm going to give you another good chance to look at this last slide before we get off of it. But this was dealing with Heather's The Sum of Us book. And then she, basically, she highlighted some of the racial inequality issues surrounding racial inequalities. She had some experience with it. And she talks about in the podcast and about in her book how she talks about this zero-sum racial competition, and it being a part of the attitude that's associated with America's history of gatekeeping. And when she talks about this zero-sum racial competition, it's very interesting. That's why I just posted that link in for the podcast. Go take a listen to that. It's very interesting because she did mention it too in her interview on the Good Day, Good Morning America show. This competition to where they feel like if there was something given to African Americans, then white people would lose something. So that is dealing with that zero-sum racial competition. All right. Now let's get straight to the issue of pool gatekeeping tonight. Make sure that's showing correctly. Give you a moment so you can take it all in, because I know I've been riding for an hour and a half and I'm trying to close it out. On August the 2nd of 2010, 6 African American teens drowned attempting to save their cousin, Kendricks Warner, who was 15. He was wading close to the shore of the Shreveport, Louisiana's Red River, when he slipped on a slick clay surface and fell into deeper water. Now, other teens, Jatavius Warner, who was 17 years old, Takitha Warner, was 13, Jamarcus Warner, 14, Latrell Stewart, 18, Latavin Stewart, 15, and then Ladarius Stewart, 17 years old. They all rushed to help the Kendricks and each other, but they were overcome. Now, the divers who conducted the recovery efforts stated that there was about 12 to 15 feet of water that slowly graded off from ankle deep to about 3 feet, and it was very slippery. And they said that if you start, hitting the bank and you start slipping down that bank, it's very hard to find traction. Now, that area was reported to have been a popular recreation area where sandbars give way to 20-foot depths. That's what was reported. So it was later discovered that neither the teenagers nor adults watching from the riverbank could swim, nor did they have any proper equipment. This wasn't an exclusive swimming event, okay? But it was just a large group of family and friends. They were including about 20 children, but they were at the sandbar for this barbecue. And I get a quote, "I didn't see my daughter, but I could, see my two sons saying, 'Help me, please.'" And that was Maud Warner, the mother of Takitha, Jamarcus, and Jatavius. Now, Marilyn Robinson, a friend of the family, told the Times of Shreveport that she watched helplessly as the victims went under. And she said, "None of us could swim. They were yelling, 'Help me, somebody please help me.' And it was nothing I could do. would watch them drown one by one. Now, this tragic, event started a discussion back then, and it prompted this contemplation about why so many young Black Americans can't swim. Now, at that time, the U.S. had almost 3,500 accidental drownings every year, and that was a rate at almost 10 a day. But according to the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the fatal drowning rate of African American children aged 5 to 14 was 3 times that of white children. Now, according to the data we discussed in our Panther and Cage 15 and 16 series, that sounds like the same rate that African Americans are being pulled over. Just making an observation. But the USA Swimming reported that just under, and this was about what, 2012, I believe, is when I think this swimming statistic came out. So this may not be 100% accurate today, but at that time, USA Swimming had reported just under 70% of African American children being surveyed, and they said that they had no or low ability to swim. Low ability merely meant that they were able to splash around in the shallow end, and a further 12% said that they could swim, but they had taught themselves. Now, the Make a Splash campaign was created, and it began targeting all non-swimmers and their parents, but there was a particular focus on an ethnic minority families. Now, they understood that many Black parents weren't teaching their children to swim, but they came into the knowledge that a major reason behind the problem could lie in the era of segregation. We talk oftentimes about the impact of some things or whatever. A lot of people always lose that, but I always hit home with that. I drive at that because there's something that I know is extremely important for our conversations. But that, the impact of what segregation had. Okay, so the author of A Contested Waters, A Social History of Swimming Pools in America, Professor Jeff Wiltz, says that the history of discrimination has continued to the drowning and swimming rates. Okay, now, in his work, he identified 2 periods of a boom in swimming rates in the U.S. and in the 1920s and the 1930s, those were. That's when the recreational swimming became popular, and then the 1950s and the 1960s when the idea of swimming as a sport really took off. Now, the first boom was marked by the construction of the 2,000 new municipal pools across the nation. Black Americans were largely and systematically denied access to those pools. Keynotes, okay? Swimming never became a part of the African American recreational culture. Now, the northern U.S., the segregation in pools ended in the 1940s and early 1950s. People remember that. So in the northern U.S., the segregation of pools ended in the 1940s and the 1950s. But many white swimmers responded by abandoning those municipal pools and heading off to private clubs in the suburbs where segregation continued to be enforced. Sound familiar? Municipal pools became a low public priority. This is what Professor Wiltz notes, Professor Jeff Wiltz. After the race riots of the 1960s, many cities did start building pools in predominantly Black areas. This also came from Professor Wiltz. But there is still a problem. Many of the new pools were often small, only 20 by 40 feet, 6 by 12 meters now, and 3.5 feet or 1 meter deep, right? It didn't really accommodate for swimming. They attracted young kids who would stand in them and splash about. And there really wasn't an effort to teach African American children to swim in these pools. Now, I'm going to go ahead and post this because you can read more about what I'm sharing. And there's a link here. It says, "Why don't Black Americans swim?" I'm going to post that because this is a very deep issue. And I do believe I have someone sent me a message. But shit. There it is. All right, go guys, check that out when you get a chance. Now, so we saw scholars collectively contribute to the inability to swim that has been historically cited among African Americans. And we saw that to be the direct results over history of discrimination through pool gatekeeping, right? Black Americans were systematically denied access to those community swimming pools, and that there's still today, when we see these incidents where these Kens and Karens are showing the residual traces of and intolerant attitudes of resistance to allow Black Americans to sort of, this any sort of like unfettered access to community swimming pools. When we see that, we're seeing the perpetuation of systemic racism in the form of gatekeeping. And make no doubt about it, it is racial oppression. Now, I'm going to say this because I can hear it. Someone's probably saying, how is that systemic racism when one person decides that person is a manager or that person is a part of the HOA community? They're trying to utilize that power. And I remember I stated earlier that there's no real authority there, but they do step out of the bounds and they try to use that power against that person to gatekeep. So this is, what it makes it systemic, right? And other issues. But it's been an issue for quite some time, and it's nothing new like the news media wants, outlets are reporting to you about. In fact, we saw a direct response to this pool gatekeeping on a television show way back in the day. Not many of us, I mean, a few of us, but if we're talking about the older crowd. But that was on a show called Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. Now, in that episode, that initial early episode, Mr. Rogers contacted a Black African-American police officer who came over, and he told him to come over and visit. Now, during that visit, Mr. Rogers decided to share this small pool of water.
At your badge here, Officer Clemens, my friends, I think, can read it.
Sorry. Gotta try to get this right.
At your badge here, Officer Clemens, my friends, I think, can read it. Police.
I have always felt policemen to be the most dangerous person in the neighborhood. So to have me playing a police officer, I was tremendously hesitant. But there was something reluctant about Fred to let go. And I said, Mr. Rogers, I would be very happy to be on your program as long as it doesn't interfere with my singing. We've had it and now it can go. We don't want the snow anymore. And he teased me about that for 20 years. He'd say, Officer Clemens, are we interfering with your career? Are we interfering? He was relentless, but he also told me, he said, that was the moment I loved you. He said, because you were not going to kiss my ass. Those are Mr. Rogers' words.
That feels good. Oh, there's Officer Clemens. Hi, Officer Clemens. Come in.
Rogers, how are you?
Fine. Won't you sit down?
Oh, sure. Just for a moment.
It's so warm. I was just putting some water on my feet.
Oh, it sure is.
Would you like to join me?
That looks awfully enjoyable, but I don't have a towel or anything.
Oh, you share mine.
Okay.
Sure.
Around the country, they didn't want black people to come and swim in their swimming pools. And Fred said, that is absolutely ridiculous.
Today, trouble under a noon sun. Negroes and white rabbis marched to a segregated hotel with these results. Manager James Brock told them to get off his private property, tossed cleaning chemicals inside the pool in an effort to get the Negroes to leave.
My being on the program was a statement for Fred.
Cool water on a hot day.
Fred came to me and said, I had this idea. You could be a police officer. And calls Clemens. Clemens says that he didn't like the idea much at first. He said, I grew up in the ghetto. I did not have a positive opinion of police officers. Policemen were sicking police dogs and water hoses on people. He says, I really had a hard time putting myself into that role. So I was not excited about being Officer Clemens at all. Clemens came around to it eventually and agreed to take on the role, as you heard. You know, the decades he spent, as the decades that he spent as a part of the show, there's one scene in particular that Clemens remembers with great emotion. And that was from that episode that you just saw, which aired in 1969. And that's where Rogers had been resting his feet in a plastic pool on a hot day. Clemens says he invited me to come over and rest my feet in the water with him. The icon, Fred Rogers, not only was showing my brown skin in the tub with his white skin as two friends, but as I was getting out of that tub, he was helping me dry my feet. Clemens says the scene touched him in a way that he, hadn't expected. And I think he was making a very strong statement. That was his way. I still was not convinced that Officer Clemens could make a positive influence in the neighborhood and in the real world neighborhood. But I think I was proven wrong, he said. You see, this was a stand against full gatekeeping that was experienced in the late 1960s, right? Y'all understand that now. But this act by Mr. Fred Rogers stood as a strong message, and it stands as a strong message today in 2021, okay? Now, within the last video, there was more from that St. Augustine pool gatekeeping incident for the Monsoon Motor Lodge in St. Augustine, right? And that was a wade-in that resulted in the motel manager pouring hydrochloric acid in the pool, okay? I think it said chemicals, but know that was hydrochloric acid. He was given that act of gatekeeping and the wade-in that was occurring. It gave momentum to the civil rights movement. And I'm going to show you the entire recap because it was important. I know a lot of other people always use this little trope. They kind of like, it's just like a defense. They use it. What would Martin Luther King say? What would he, he doesn't like your protest, blah, 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 blah. So I want you guys to take a look at this, all right? Go ahead and get this on the screen now. So that way I don't stop the video this time, I'm trying to put it on later. There's a lag and it causes that to happen. But
tourists sunbathing peacefully by day, and by night, Negro integration marches with sometimes violent reaction. Today, trouble under a noon sun. Negroes and white rabbis marched to a segregated hotel, were met by the manager with these results.
Now let us have prayer at this place.
Look here.
Let us have prayer for the manager of this place.
You're not having any prayer here.
Also.
You're not having any prayer here. You're private property, and you're
with the prayer.
private property, and I'm ordering you to leave here. You're on private property, and I'm ordering you to leave this place here.
Reverend Martin Luther King watched from across the street. He had been arrested last week at the same motel.
Oh, God bless you. You're on private property. You go too.
While all this was going on, a grand jury was meeting, trying to resolve the crisis. And at the motel, 2 white men had registered as guests. Another group of Negroes showed up, and as you see, were turned away. But the white men had invited other Negroes to be their guests in the swimming pool. Then manager James Brock told them to get off his private property, tossed cleaning chemicals inside the pool in an effort to get the Negroes to leave. Finally, an off-duty policeman jumped in, and the beginning of the end was at hand. While the arrests were being made, grand jury was about to bring in its recommendations. It asked that Dr. King remove his influence from the community for 30 days, that demonstrations cease for the same period. And then a biracial committee would take over the problem. It's doubtful whether the Negro leadership will accept this. Whites talk of a vigilante committee. Tension rides high, and another march is scheduled for tonight.
You saw that video's documentation. That is some of the important points about the history of pool gatekeeping, and how Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was involved in the Monson Motor Lodge incident in the summer of 1964. And the fact that these wade-ins were one of the final forms of protest that pushed Lyndon Baines Johnson to sign the Civil Rights Act into a bill is extremely important to know just how much turmoil the country was embroiled in at the time. But, you know, what I discovered after seeing a Facebook post of Mr. Rogers and Francois Clemens reenacting that 1969 pool moment we talked about earlier was more, here goes that term, American exceptionalism. Now, a post to the historic photographs Facebook page generated a very contentious debate regarding the nation. Now, specifically, I want to show you an individual by the name of Eric Russell, who made sure to reiterate that only some areas of the country were segregated. Let me go ahead and get this photo for you. All right, I hope you can see it. It looks very small here, but I hope that you can see it there. But in this image, which is, special pleading, we talked about it. This is why we, had that term explored last stream. Now, Eric Russell said that, we do a disservice to the multitude of people, white and black, who have been fighting for equal rights for 2 centuries. He cited that those individuals had achieved many victories, and that by the post saying that Black Americans were prevented from swimming alongside whites in 1969, it was counter to celebrating those victories. Now, then he posted a picture of what he cited as a public swimming pool in 1955 in Pittsburgh, where Mr. Rogers filmed his show. Now, remember we talked about this, and it said that some segregation in the North had ended with the pools. The pool segregation ended in the 1940s and 1950s. So here it is, an image of 1955, right? Just want to show you that. Let me get back here so we can get to the next image. And I'm showing this because these are the conversations, like I said, that is had. These are common conversations when people say that no, this stuff doesn't exist. And then, yeah, the conversations happen. All right. Now, like I said, he said we did a disservice, but check out Alan Hampton with his divide and conquer, right? Eric received support with the 56 likes that you can see in the photo, and I'm sure there are more. But Alan Hampton steps in and says that that the uninformative post like this, which is the post from the historic photographs Facebook page of Francois Clemens and Mr. Rogers recreating their 1969 pool episode. He said that it was just reheating and repackaging to sell the masses the old tactic of divide and conquer to keep everyone away, everyone afraid of themselves. Each of how or all while American freedoms are being taken away. Excuse me, sorry about that. So this irritating comment, and I'll address in a second. But let me go ahead and continue to show it. Let me show you the next one. Because these all happen in succession. I think I got one more after this one. But you can see Bill Moore attempted to acknowledge that someone points out, when someone points out, and this is the point I would like to make too, and when someone points out, an issue is more pervasive than Eric's understanding, his first reaction was to undermine it with an exception for an example. Remember we talked about this special pleading, right? He stated that even if segregated swimming occurred in a vacuum, it needed to be addressed. In another response, now he said it needed to be addressed, which is true, but in another response, this is further, same conversation, but further down. Those got delay, so I'm gonna give you a second. What you see, Bill Moore, he talked about the impact of the discriminatory practice of pool gatekeeping. He cited statistics that the YMCA went from one branch and 1,000 members in 1957, late 50s now, had no pools. And it went to 18,000 members and 8 pools in 1969, including outdoor summer programs and summer swim programs, which those were completely off limits to Black children. 1969, YMCA, Young Men's Christian Association. Okay? And while the YMCA was forced to change its segregating practices in the 1970s, it would emulate former public segregation practices privately. So basically, even though it was publicly admonished or publicly condemned to do away with segregation, it still practiced it privately. All right. Now, before we move forward to the conclusion, let me get back to this. All that conversation was cited from what you see here. Sorry about that. Getting all these messages. But all of that was started from this conversation that you see, this conversation that you saw earlier was cited from this Facebook post that you see over here, right here to my left. All right. I want to give it a bigger screen so you guys can see it and read the words at the top. You can see the actual Facebook post. And at the top has the caption of 1969, when Black Americans were still prevented from swimming alongside whites, Mr. Rogers decided to invite Officer Clemens to join him and cool his feet in a pool, breaking a well-known color barrier. That's divide and conquer by posting that, right? I'm so tired of people using that term. I want to be able to say that there's a lot of privilege to think that we don't have to acknowledge the incidents and the facts that define American history, right? The fact that we're talking about an area or a time between 1959 and 1969, the riots that were happening in 67, just for example, lets us know that it was a very heated time, and that the civil rights movement was fighting to secure our humanity. Okay. This stuff is going to keep popping up. I apologize for that. But like I said, it lets us know it's a very heated time and that civil rights movement was fighting to secure our humanity. But the idea that the conversations like these that we just saw from Eric Russell and Bill Moore, which acknowledge the portions of our American society is a tactic of divide and conquer, is evidence that we were never united. I want y'all to understand when I say this. This is a conversation I can have off the cuff. We can have this conversation at another time, but just keep in mind what I'm trying to attempt to communicate to you tonight is that we would be united in thought if we were ever truly united. That contentious debate that you saw earlier that we just highlighted, it wouldn't be occurring if we had ever really been united. And so Mr. Eric Russell can special plead his way into saying that the country was not as segregated as history tells. but we know that this is just an attempt to sugarcoat what was a nation in turmoil. And, that he was just using what we term as white privilege to omit the unpreferred portions of American history that help define American history. Now, a link to that conversation, if you want to see it to get context, if you think I got out of context or whatever, I'm going to post that right now in the comment section. Go check that out. It's on Facebook, so you ain't got far to go. You can go back, check it out another time. You can make comments. You can tell Mr. Eric Russell whatever that I said something about. I felt like he was special pleading. But there it is. Here's the comments. Now all these comments are getting filtered to the Facebook page for the Panther and Cage. They're not going to my personal page, or they're not going to Let's Talk About It group. And I apologize. I got to figure out why StreamYard is now limiting my comments. I'm sure that some of the people in Let's Talk About It group are happy about that, but that's just because a lot of those people are detractors, cowards, and uneducated people who tend to want to convince you that, I'm teaching you critical race theory, that, and any of the other negative stuff that they like to perpetuate. Anyway. Tonight, we were able to cover some more history, all right? All right, David. Tonight, we were able to, we got the opportunity, we were able to cover some more history in regard to the concept of gatekeeping. We're viewing pool gatekeeping, which was an intentional act of challenging, filtering, or limiting the access of a person to any public or community swimming pools or beaches. We sought to further expand that conversation from gatekeeping into examining intolerant attitudes that appear to be autonomously, they supersede the genuine authority. And that's what we were talking about earlier, when they were stepping outside of, an actual legitimate authority. Those people we call the gatekeepers, are acting in the place of authentic authority. And most of the time, they're frivolously doing it to where there's no need for this kind of access control. We saw that with the Knox Ridge Karen. Now, despite the consensus around many of the conservative social circles that perpetuate the idea that racism doesn't exist, the viral video gatekeepers tend to harbor intolerant attitudes that appear to be very consistent. All right, they appear to be very consistent with the same attitudes that have historically been used to systematically deny Black African Americans access to popular beach locations and access to community swimming pools. Now, we can examine the potential source of these attitudes, which would be the residual effects of America's racist or America's past racial animosity, and what we have to do collectively as a community to cease these incidents of gatekeeping. Not just pool gatekeeping, but what we have to do is we have to just call out these incidents by exposing those gatekeepers, those members who we see participating and being active within the gatekeeping community. You've seen them before. We've seen them. All right. By doing this, we prevent this social acceptance of this behavior. Now, there's a video out, which I'm not going to show you. There's a video where there's this lady accosting her neighbors who were they were lawyers, and they were trying to put this cobblestone driveway together in the front of their home. And that Karen that is in the video, she starts harassing them about the HOA rules and challenging their authority to make any home improvements. Now, this act ceased, when all the neighbors came out and they began to condemn, that Karen from, all her actions and whatnot. Now, that was a simple solution to the gatekeeping, and that kind of simple solution to gatekeeping reduces the social and cultural bigotry. Okay. Now, I hope tonight wasn't too long of a show. We are just at 2 hours, and I hope, I'm sorry, it was long, but we need to get this out. We need to talk about this. But I know that it's late, and I'm kind of busy, as you see. But I hope to continue the exploration into the systemic and structural racism very soon. Now, this show, as you can see from the banner below, that is Panther and Cage 23.5, the history of pool gatekeeping. And I hope that you enjoyed the show. I thank you for your contributions, Vanessa. Thank you. Thank you all for your contributions over the past year. and helping us communicate the Black experience and share these experiences in order to help our Brevard County community specifically understand and behave in a more socially acceptable manner. I am your host, Panther, and as always, I wish you love, peace. May the Most High guide your path.